All right, he's got his work cut out for him, and joining us now is Nick Bontis, a very familiar face, of course, to CHCH News viewers. He's Bontis on Business on Fridays on News Now. And, of course, he's a professor with the DeGroote School of Business. In fact, he's just come over here from finishing teaching a night class, so we appreciate your time. Sorry, I'm getting interrupted right now. We're getting warned. All right, Nick Bontis has been sitting here for the last 10 minutes or so as all of this stuff has been developing with Rob Ford and, of course, with Bob Bertina. Change, big word tonight. Rob Ford, Bob Bertina, Rick Golding, the list goes on and on. What are your thoughts right off the top, Nick?
It's about the appetite for the electorate. There's a famous Greek saying 2,500 years ago when democracy started, or "Lenchos omili," meaning the people voted. And you know what? The appetite for change in Toronto was great. That's why you had Ford coming down with a victory. And the guy reminds me a little bit of a bombastic Mel Lastman. So at minimum, Toronto's going to move forward, but it's going to be an entertaining 4 years, I say. And with regards to Burlington and Hamilton, it was really about fatal flaws. Not who had them, but who didn't. In the case of Cam Jackson, we have the pier. In the case of poor old Fred, we have the Pan Am Stadium. In the case of poor old Larry, we still have the donations from years ago. It turned out that Bob was the clean one, and Bob's moving forward with the mayor.
Hard to come out from under the shadow of your past, of course, when you're running on your record. Nick, let's talk a bit about the campaign overall. Online campaigning is something I know you've been paying attention to this time around. What are your thoughts on some of the victors, it seems now, some of their online postings?
So what I did was some interesting analysis related to web hits, not only on Wikipedia pages in terms of a number of page views, you can get that analysis yourself, but also how many Twitter followers did the candidates have, as well as how many friends or fans did they make on Facebook. And interestingly, in the last 3 weeks leading up to today, we had a little bit of predictive correlation. The people that attracted the most fans or page views on Wikipedia, turns out those are the ones that eked out the win. So you know what? Online campaigning is becoming more important. It may have not been the be-all and end-all in this particular contest, but I suspect 4 years from now at the next municipal election, and definitely for the next provincial and federal election, anybody who's running is going to have to look at a very important Web 2.0 strategy.
What about the fact, though, in many cases, specifically municipal elections, seniors tend to be the ones who get out the vote more, but they're probably in the lower ranks when it comes to people using online methods. So you've got to reach out and touch your voters in two different ways, don't you?
Yeah, face-to-face, obviously knocking on doors is important, but let's not belittle the seniors and their internet aptitude. In fact, the fastest growing internet literacy rates is among seniors. So I know most of those candidates actually concentrate on that particular demographic, and they're going to need to continue to do so. You
wanted to talk about turnover. There's been a lot of it in the big chairs, but not so much in the incumbency chairs. What did you want to say on that?
Well, here's the interesting thing about the Toronto race. They wanted change too, and Ford is going to deliver the goods there, hopefully, on change. But when it comes to the Hamilton race, I'm sorry, but I have to use a sports analogy here. We are the same baseball team. The only thing that happened was that we rotated an outfielder for the pitcher's mound. Are we really going to have significant change over the next 4 years? We've had major challenges. We know them all. They've been listed tonight: economic development, poverty, stadiums, and what have you. And here's my advice to all the people out there in Hamilton land. You know what? Today was the election, and you took your chance to vote. I didn't like the voter turnout. I wished it was higher, but you know what? It doesn't end today. Tomorrow the phones can be open. December the 1st is the first day. What we need to do as an electorate is be more proactive. Contact your ward, contact the mayor. Let's have him and her hear all the things that we want out of the city. We can't just shut up and wait for another 4 years. They need to hear our voice to keep the city moving forward.
And we are working on getting some turnout numbers for you, Nick, because I know you want to touch on that. But we do understand that perhaps 50% of Toronto voters got out and voted. That is a significantly higher number than we've seen in the past. So that's an improvement when you consider 30 to 35% as a typical number.
Yeah, typically in Hamilton, we're looking at about 37 or 38%. We got to look at it relatively speaking. It's been mentioned about what municipal elections are like in other countries. And of course, the media's been talking about Australia a lot too, getting a fine or getting incentive for voting. Unfortunately, 37% is still far too low. We have to understand that the municipal election is the one election that actually impacts us directly the most. And to only have just above 1 in 3 people vote, I think it's far too low, Nick.
Nick, you mentioned Fred and the stadium issue. Of course, that's a significant issue in Hamilton, the Pan Am Stadium. You were moderating the panel back in the summer, which was talking about where the stadium should be going. And when it kind of came out that West Harbour was sort of going to be the decision, right? That was the outcome of that meeting. Am I correct?
Well, a final decision wasn't being made. Actually, at that point in time, it was the Hamilton Ticats that were still holding on to their position. Mayor Fred still wanted to push for the West Harbour, yeah.
But what was your sense there at the meeting there? Did you sense that there was a lot of division in Hamilton about where this potential stadium should be going?
Yeah, this isn't a criticism on actually Mayor Fred, because I think he had the right collaborative behavior and technique for collegiality. What I think it might be a criticism on is the management and administration of the council. What scares me the most is we have about 13 to 15 of the same. These are going to be the same personalities. Now, you got Bob, who's actually sitting in the main chair. Of course, he's the media professional. He's the fantastic orator. But the question still remains, will Bob have the ability to get the most out of all those people and make sure we keep the momentum moving forward?
All right, we've just got some numbers in. 37% turnout for Hamilton. Exact same numbers as last time. Almost the exact same council as last time, just a little rotation in the chairs a little bit.
That's what I predicted, of course. You know, like I said, it's the baseball analogy. I don't think there's much change here. I want to be wrong, and I think the way we can be wrong is to actually make sure that we keep these people accountable for what promises they made.
All right, Nick Bontis, thanks for your insight tonight. We'll be checking back with you a little bit later on. Appreciate that. Joining me back now in studio, Nick Bontis from the DeGroote School of Business. Nick, thanks again for your time, for your insight tonight. I don't want to say that you're hung up on turnout, but it is an important thing, especially at the municipal level. We thought there were going to be a higher number of voters. Just want to run through some rough numbers. We have 30% St. Catharines, around 40% in Hamilton, 50% in Toronto, around 40% in Oakville. That's not good enough, is it?
No, not good enough at all. In fact, our 37% number just changed to 40%, not much of a significant increase. The weather wasn't too bad today, so we can't use that as an excuse, but the bottom line is if we're just slightly higher than 1 in 3 people voting, that means 2 people out of 3 who didn't care to make a difference for this city. And you know what we're going to have to consider, Nick, is perhaps we have to make an Australian model consideration. Is there potentially an increase in voter turnout if we offer a carrot or a stick? The carrot, of course, perhaps is a bonus discount on your property bill, your property tax bill, or the stick, which is you get fined if you don't vote.
So what's the better move from your perspective? Do you think is it too much of a penalty to fine people if they're not voting, or is it just more of an incentive program to say, here, we'll give you a bit of a break?
Well, the real answer to that is we don't know. We've never done an experiment like that in this particular country, so a lot of research has to be done. But you know what? I'm sure what the council people would say is, you know what, let's have a fine. Extra money for the city means more money to actually provide more services.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about Rob Ford once again, because he's been really the story of the night here. I mean, those numbers, if we can bring up the Rob Ford numbers, he just thumped his competitors, and that is something that nobody was expecting. Poll-wise, it looked neck and neck heading into tonight. But just after 8 o'clock, all of a sudden, Rob Ford, there we are, 380,000 to 287.3, and then 94. Even if you add up Pantaloni and Smitherman, exactly. I'm no mathematician, but basically Ford took more than 50% of the vote.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Well, what's unbelievable is, of course, we must not pay attention to polls. It was Smitherman, I think, that was ahead in the most recent one. But you know what? This thing about Ford is that he's a common sense guy. He's like the guy next door. Talks in very, very simple language, and people are resonating with it. What can we learn about what happened in Toronto? Well, think about the federal election. You know, you got Harper and Ignatieff. You know, even though Harper is still the incumbent now as the conservative, he tries to talk the common sense language, whereas Ignatieff still comes across with that highfalutin academic type of speak. And unfortunately, that might not be resonating with most of the electorate here in Canada. So the one thing that I did take away was that Ford, the common sense talking guy, and people are resonating with that.
And we certainly know Stephen Harper has sort of tried to make that move, and you just positioned it well. What about provincially? We're coming now within a year of the provincial election. Dalton McGuinty, Tim Hudak, Andrea Horvath, of course. Tim Hudak is probably paying very close attention to what Rob Ford has accomplished this evening, isn't he?
I agree. I mean, it's obviously Dalton's to lose. I think that's what's going to happen. Potentially, he's leading into this going in for a year from now. We see a similar situation happening in British Columbia as well. So I think the incumbents actually have the momentum on the provincial side going in, especially with regards to Dalton. Ontario is a very fickle type of electorate. Of course, they might stick around with conservative on the conservative side, but they still want to keep Dalton on the liberal side to help balance those off. It's
interesting too, because perhaps the 1 year of Rob Ford and the change which has happened at municipal level could perhaps play to the benefit of the Liberals in terms of, well, we've seen what happened with change. We're not liking that year of change. So maybe we'll stick with what we know provincially too, right?
You know, you're right, Nick. It all depends on what happens over the next few months. The interesting story, of course, is going to be the one in Hamilton. You have Bob right now taking over a council of primarily incumbents, and you still have significant infrastructure projects over everybody's head. Still, you have Pan Am Stadium. February is the new deadline. What's the same council going to do that was anything different? You got LRT and rapid transit coming down the pipeline, and we still have the major issues of taxes, poverty, and the big one I think that everybody's going to be concentrating on, how do we make small business thrive in Hamilton? Bob's got to grab that issue with both arms.
That's a huge issue. I mean, small business is sort of the heart of society and the heart of what's generating tax revenue as well. Let's talk a bit about the numbers again in Hamilton, because Bob Bertina really soundly defeated both Larry Deaney and Fred Eisenberger here. I mean, this wasn't very close. And he came into the election last, didn't have much of a campaign, but still managed to pull it off. What does that say to you, even just as a voter?
Well, interestingly, Bob, you're right, did not come in with any platform. Actually was the quietest of the three. I remember him coming to McMaster University for a panel and actually was very, very checked and very controlled compared to Larry and Fred. Now, we understand why Fred had to be a little bit more vocal. He's the guy winning the race, the incumbent. He's got to maintain his platform and his position. And Larry, of course, is just the nature of his personality to actually be a little bit more open and going with his talk. So, secret is, Bob, hey, let's be quiet. Let's not promise too much. We're still going to win anyway.
And let's see where that goes. Nick Bontis, I appreciate your insight tonight. Thanks so much for your time once again.